Hey guys, Ben Potter here, and about probably a month or so ago now, I watched a part of an interview on YouTube with Daniel Carson, who is Chris Tomlin's electric guitar player. I'll put a link to that video down in the description. But towards the end of that, he talked about his pedal board and his effects and his amps and guitars and all of basically his gear and how he was using it. And there was a little bit of playing on the video, not a lot, but there was some. And he talked about how he uses delays, and it's not a new technique, but he uses a dotted eighth delay into a quarter note delay, and he has the quarter note delay kind of with a longer feedback and some modulation to it. And so I took my pedal board and used my DD7 for a dotted eighth delay, and used my M5 for the quarter note delay with modulation, and kind of mimic that and put a little video up on Facebook. And a friend of mine who knows that I have the POD HD500X and also has a HD500 asked if I could share my patch with him. And I was like, well, I didn't really do that on the pod, but I could make a Daniel Carson patch easy enough. And so I set out to do that using the information from the video and how he talked about his rig, and using the effects and stuff that I have as kind of a reference. I created a Daniel Carson patch. And so I want to kind of walk you through. The patch is up on Custom Tone if you want to download it, but I kind of wanted to walk you through what's involved there, and talk a little bit about some things that he said in the video that he uses, and then talk about how I incorporated that onto the pod. So I'm going to cut to a view of the screen of the pod, so I can kind of walk you through the different things that are in the chain and what the different foot switches and stuff do. The guitar that he used in the video, the guitar that he played was a Fender Tele with, I believe, wide range humbuckers in it. And then he talked about a Les Paul that he uses. So to kind of mimic that, I created the patch with, and will use in the video, this Gibson Les Paul Tribute. It's the gold top from 2018. So that's what I use to create the patch, and what I will be using in the video, because that's the guitar that I have that I think probably sounds the closest to what he was using. One thing that I will mention, if you download this patch, I have the global EQ on the POD HD500. I have the global EQ. I have the high cut set at 8K. And I think I have the low cut set at about 100K. That was a tip that I saw in another video talking about how to kind of get some more realistic tones out of your pod. So if you are using the HD500X and you have it with the newest firmware update, there's the global EQ section in there that will let you adjust that global EQ. I don't know if you can do that on the HD500 or not. I don't know if they included that in an update or not. So if you can't, you can take this patch, and one of the things in the signal chain is a noise gate. You could turn that off and turn that into an EQ if you wanted to, and then just roll off everything from 8K up. So that would be a way that you could get around that. But I wanted to point that out. I actually accidentally had the high cut set at 6K when I made the patch, and then I noticed that and brought it back up to 8K. And I had to kind of change some of the settings on the patch because it made that much of a difference. So if you don't have the global EQ set that way, you'll either need to adjust the patch, or you'll want to go and set your global EQ that way to kind of mimic the way that I created the patch. So I'm going to cut to a view of the pod itself and kind of walk you through the patch and play a little bit so you can kind of hear what it sounds like. Alright, so in the video, Daniel Carson talks about how he uses a matchless DC30 and an AC30 amp. And he used the DC30 in the video. I went ahead and used the AC30 amp model on the pod and was able to get pretty close. He talks about how he runs his amps a little bit dirty and then uses a volume pedal at the beginning of his chain, so before his drives and before his amp, and uses that as a way to adjust his volume, but also to kind of clean up his tone. So pretty much the first thing in the chain here that I have in this patch is the volume pedal, which is on the expression pedal here. So if I pull it all the way down, I get nothing. and then if I put it all the way up, I get the bass amp tone with a little bit of grit on it. And then I can adjust the volume pedal to kind of get various amounts of, various levels of clean. So here's all the way up again. Now, the tone from the video, which is what I tried to base this off of, sounded very compressed. He has a compression pedal on his board, but I don't think he used it in the video. So I don't know if the matchless amps just naturally have a little bit more of a compressed tone to them, or I'm not sure. It didn't really look like they were close miking the amp in the video, so it could have just been the camera picking up the amp in the room that was compressing from the volume. That's very likely, but I went ahead, I have a compression pedal in this patch and I have it set always on just because I like the way it sounds and the way it interacted with the amp. If you wanted to attach that to a foot switch and turn it on and off, you could do that. I'm only using the top 4 foot switches on the patch because the person that I made this patch for does not run their pod in foot switch 5 through 8 mode, which lets you turn all of the, which lets you use all 8 foot switches to turn on and off effects. They use theirs in preset mode, so the bottom row changes presets, the top row changes or turns on and off effects. So I limited it to just the 4 foot switches. So the compressor's always on. There's also a noise gate, like I mentioned, that's always on. And then I have the amp model, which you just heard. And then again, he has a full tone Fulldrive on his board that he said that he uses a lot. And again, he didn't demonstrate it in the video, so I don't know exactly, how that sounds with his amp. I have a Fulldrive 2, so it's slightly different than the one that Daniel Carson has, but I did set it in vintage mode and kind of set it up the way that I would use it with this AC30 sound, and then tried to mimic the way that the, tried to use some of the stomp box models in the pod to mimic the sound of the Fulldrive 2. So I used, on the first foot switch here, I have the Tube Screamer model that I have set to be like the Fulldrive 2 without the boost on. So here's the amp tone again. And now here's with the Screamer model emulating the Fulldrive 2. Before I actually have the Fulldrive 2 in my chain right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the Fulldrive 2 and then I'll play the amp clean, then I'll play the Fulldrive 2, and then I'll switch to the Screamer, and you can kind of hear the comparison between the Fulldrive 2 and the Screamer model the way I have it set. So here is the amp by itself. Here is the Fulldrive 2. And the Screamer. So I'll go back and forth between the Fulldrive and the Screamer so you can kind of hear that. So I think that is pretty close. Then the other thing that I did, the Fulldrive 2 does have a boost mode on it. Now with the Fulldrive, you can only use, until you get to the version 3, I believe, of the Fulldrive, but the 2 and before, you can only use the boost mode with the drive pedal on. You can't use the boost by itself. So what I used is I used the boost comp model on the pod, and I put that before the Screamer model. So it's pushing the Screamer model into more drive. So what I'll do is I'm going to turn the boost mode on the Fulldrive, and I'll go back and forth. let me show you just what I've got going on with the pod first. So here's the amp by itself again. Here's the screamer emulating the Fulldrive. And now here's the boost comp going into the screamer emulating the Fulldrive on with the boost circuit engaged. Okay, so here is the Fulldrive. Here's my Fulldrive 2 with the boost circuit. So I think there's a little bit more variance there than without the boost circuit, I think. But I think it still kind of gets you in the ballpark. And then what you can do with the pod that you can't do with the Fulldrive then is you could use the boost by itself. So here's the amp, and then here's just that boost side of the boost comp that I'm using as the boost side of the Fulldrive. Pretty big volume jump there because it's not being compressed by the screamer model. It's just pushing the amp further. But you know, if you wanted to use the amp tone by itself and then get like a solo boost or something with a little bit of added compression, that might be a way to do it. So then I get into the delay section. So he talked about how he uses either a tape delay or a digital delay depending on what he's feeling for a dotted 8 thing. So I believe this is the digital delay. I haven't really been a huge fan of the tape delay model on the pods. Maybe I just haven't gotten them dialed in right, but I used a digital delay here. So this is the dotted 8th. I'll go to the middle position on the Les Paul, so this is both pickups together. So that is the dotted 8th, and then he talked about how he uses an analog delay with modulation. He actually uses the Memory Man, and there is a Memory Man model in the pod, so that's what I used for a quarter note delay with kind of some longer trails on it to kind of get a little bit more of an ambient thing. So here's how I have that going. So you can hear there's some modulation going on there and some other stuff. He also talked about how he might use that sound and do some swells. So So that's pretty much the extent of the patch. It's basically the AC30 model with some grit on it. Volume pedal at the beginning. The screamer model emulating the Fulldrive 2. The boost comp model emulating the boost side of the Fulldrive 2. A digital dotted 8th delay, and then a quarter note analog delay with some modulation on it. And then like I said, there's a noise gate on there and an always-on an always-on compressor on there as well. So if you like this tone, it is up on Custom Tone. I will put a link to that in the description, as well as a link to the interview that I watched that I got this information from, and I hope you enjoy. Have a good one.